Look at how it appears to have been scheduled decades in advance. White Noise was a novel written in 1985 about a train derailment in America's Rust Belt by Don DeLillo. Don's book revolves around a train derailment, death, media, psychic data, and American culture. 3 different film companies bought the movie rights for White Noise, but never produced any film. In 2016, Passage Pictures acquired the rights and pushed the project through development. After hiring a cast in 2021, the film was released in 2022, and here's how the story goes. Jack Gladney is a professor of Hitler Studies. No, seriously, Hitler Studies at the College on the Hill in Ohio. Jack is played by Adam Driver, who you may know as the bad guy from Star Wars, because I guess the director needed a convincing Hitler Studies expert. His life is disrupted by a cataclysmic train accident that casts a cloud of chemical waste over the town. What a coincidence. This airborne toxic event forces a massive evacuation. They encounter a man who rants about the lack of media attention on the evacuees. The movie was set in a fictional town, however the movie was filmed in a real town, and residents of East Palestine were the extras in the movie about the train derailing in Ohio. CNN interviewed Ben Ratner, one of the extras from the movie. Ben Ratner helped them film the movie in East Palestine, where he lived and they filmed. Which is really strange because Don DeLillo also wrote a book called Ratner's Star in 1989. But we're only just getting started, because to understand the full picture, we actually need to go back to predictive programming is a concept that people in power use fictional books, movies, and media as a mass mind control tool to help the public accept planned future events. When these changes are put through, the public will already be familiar with them and can accept them as natural progressions, thereby reducing possible public resistance. Most commonly, people believe the government creates a problem so that the population will look to their leaders for a solution. However, because the leaders planned the crisis, they offer a solution that was planned long before the crisis ever happened. One way you could look at this is through the lens of, starting in 1979, Islamic terrorism began global attacks at an accelerating pace, leading into 2000. To an outside observer, their terror growth curve was remarkably exponential, growing much like a Silicon Valley tech startup. It wouldn't take a super genius to notice that there would be a larger event soon, because it seemed they were constantly pulling off bigger and bigger attacks over the prior 2 decades. At the same time as Islamic terrorism was developing in the Middle East, the government developed the internet and was mulling over ways to monitor American civilians. So when the biggest terrorist attack ever happened, Congress was somehow already prepared to push the largely unrelated Patriot Act into law. On October 26th, just 47 days after the tragedy, a 131-page document outlining the provision of funds for a mass surveillance program was signed into law. Under the Patriot Act, federal agents can secretly conduct a physical search or wiretap on American citizens to gather evidence of criminal conduct without any probable cause, as the Fourth Amendment otherwise explicitly requires. Allow me to be very clear. Their response to 9/11 was to explicitly take away one of our constitutional rights, and it took them just 47 days to make that decision. Instead of taking the effort to remove the wrecked tankers still full of toxins and safely dispose of the waste within them, the decision was made to empty the remaining tankers and burn up the toxins directly into the local environment. A probable reason for doing this is to get the area cleared faster in order to get the railroad back in service so that corporate profits aren't affected. At the same time, Norfolk Southern offered $25,000 to the town for their inconvenience. There are 3 main considerations for the chemical model of this disaster. First is atmospheric effect. This is a major concern for locals and people who live downwind, but it's less of a concern for the rest of the world. 2. Waterway contamination. This disaster happened right on the Ohio River, so waterway contamination is likely to be a huge issue. Even if they're able to dam part of the creek that has most of the toxins in it, Eventually, the toxins leach into the water table, where they will spread over hundreds and possibly thousands of miles. The third thing to consider is food chain contamination. When contaminants get into the environment, they're processed by plants and animals. Because humans eat plants and animals, over time we get secondhand exposure to the contaminant. For example, if you buy a Starbucks latte made with soy from soybeans in the Ohio area, then that soy is likely to have a certain amount of these contaminants in it. These are the chemicals we're talking about. 5 tanks of vinyl chloride, 1 tank of diethylene glycol, 1 tank of ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, 1 tank of ethyl hexyl acrylate, 4 tanks of petroleum lube oil, literally an oil spill, 1 tank of butyl acrylate, and 2 hoppers of polyvinyl. It's worth noting that this is one of the only derailments in American history to cause immediate damage to the atmosphere, drinking water, and general health of American citizens even 200 miles away. Not to mention it's already starting to affect other states. What happens next is an ecological breakdown that spreads out from East Palestine. Like a pebble dropped in a pond creates ripples. Corn, soy, and wheat are the main crops in Ohio. The area is also known for its pork, beef, and dairy products. However, the recent natural disaster has put all of these in danger. The main waterways in the region all run into the Ohio River, which then flows into the Mississippi River, and finally into the Gulf of Mexico. Roughly 80% of the world's livestock grain is irrigated by the watershed, and 60% of North America's birds use the waterway. 1/4 of all of North America's fish live in the waterway, and as you can imagine, the recent disaster has had a huge impact on the local ecosystem. About 30 million people live along the Mississippi River, and 132 million benefit from it in some way. The government recommends not to swim in the river due to the pollution. Also, last year, there was a hexavalent chromium spill in Michigan, which ran down the Huron River. Water quality in the eastern Midwest probably hasn't recovered since then. Hopefully, it'll all be diluted by the time it reaches the Mississippi, but still, the impact is significant. The recent natural disaster has had a significant impact on the ecosystem, people living in the region, and the local economy. It's a complex situation, and the authorities will need to work hard to address it. We can only hope everything gets better soon. 2-Bit Da Vinci did a great expose showing how 3 firms are the major owners of Norfolk Southern Railway, and also every other major news network. These companies, BlackRock specifically, are known for having their employees switch into government offices in order to rewrite the government for their business interests. For example, 3 former BlackRock executives are currently in the Biden administration. 1. The government rushes a response, likely one that doesn't actually address or solve any of the problems, and it actually is likely to make some unrelated problem much worse. 2. Railroad companies signal they're fixing the problem, but at the same time doing as little as possible to actually solve anything. 3. Eventually, lobbyists will have the laws rewritten, maybe in a few months, maybe in a few years, to deregulate the railroads again. 4. After enough derailments happen, statistically, eventually, a rail car carrying, for example, nuclear waste will be involved. And then we're going to have a problem that'll last tens or hundreds of thousands of years in our waterways. To call this a disaster is like saying the Titanic was a big boat. Corporate America never needed a long-term cover-up. They just needed people to not ask too many questions so they can get the trains back on the rails and resume corporate profits. Odds are Norfolk Southern will receive a huge insurance payout from the wreckage if they haven't already. The price paid for these corporate profits was the largest ecological disaster in recent history. It doesn't take a genius or too much creativity to imagine that among dozens of powerful financial institutions pulling strings all around the globe who have trillions of dollars combined, it's not that crazy to think someone might have several major events planned of various impact sizes, perhaps even decades ahead of time, to profit from timing the market moving, for example. It could even be a small trader with only a couple million in the market, who's just looking to make money by causing huge catastrophes and then trading the news. There were plenty of powerful people aboard the Titanic. If you knew they would perish, you could profit from the aftershocks of their death. You could even write a book and profit from the uncanny similarity after the event. And if you think perhaps Don DeLillo was filled in on some information that would normally be private, perhaps he was trying to send a message 30 years ago. And it might also be worth considering, when you have enough power, you could even glamorize your crimes with a book or a movie, because no one would ever believe someone like you would commit them in the first place. And if anyone gets close to the truth, like Evan Lambert.
Oh, there we go. We can drop that banner there. You can see Evan giving his live report there. It's while he was on rush hour. They tell him to stop, and you'll see someone come up and appear to put his hand on Evan's arm. Right there. Okay, let's listen.
I am allowed to be here. Let's go. Let's go. You're under arrest. Under arrest. I am on the ground. What are you talking
Or maybe it's all a simple coincidence that the train derailed in East Palestine, exactly where the White Noise filmed with Ben Ratner, who shares a name with another one of Don DeLillo's books. And Don DeLillo seems to just happen to have the same 1,000-mile stare as Morgan Robertson. Also, some random long-term health tracking program was introduced, coincidentally, a few months before the real train derailment happened. Maybe it's a coincidence. What do you think?